Hey everyone, Rodney here at Cleves Tech, and today I'm going to go over inpainting using SwarmUI. This video does assume you know the basics of using SwarmUI, which I do have a video on setup and the basics, which you can check out. Now, if not familiar with inpainting, it is basically just editing part of an image to change or replace something in the image. For example, changing the color of a shirt or removing something from an image, like a telephone pole you don't want there. I'll also show you how to deal with one problem I have had with Flux, and that is it will leave a slight edge around where the mask was sometimes, and I'll show you a couple ways to deal with that. We're going to cover today is how to do the inpainting with Flux in SwarmUI. I'm not going to be digging extremely deep into every setting because honestly, some of them I don't even understand fully what they do or if they're even necessary. I've just never found a need for them. So I'll be covering what I know and what I've learned. If you're not familiar with inpainting, it is easiest to think of it as just editing part of an image. Maybe you want to change a clothing color or something like that. Now, I will be covering inpainting with Flux, but many other models are very similar. A lot of the stuff in SwarmUI is pretty much the same with a lot of stuff. So a lot of these steps and everything that I'm covering do carry over if you're doing just general inpainting with other stuff. I will say for certain other things, like when I still use SDXL, I still use Focus myself for inpainting because I still think that's the best. And I even sometimes use it for inpainting Flux things because sometimes Flux Fill can't do what I need done, and Focus usually will get it done. There's one thing you're going to find with Flux Fill is when you go to replace something, some things just aren't going to work well, and you'll have a hard time with them. It comes down to it uses the rest of the image and everything else to determine how to replace stuff. So it's not as simple as just boom, put something different there. It doesn't always work that way, at least for me. It seems to be a lot of hit or miss with certain things. But for certain things like changing clothing, things like that, a lot of times it's not that difficult to do those, and it works very well. Now, the first thing you're going to need to do is install what you need for inpainting, and that would be the Flux Fill tool. That's one of the Black Forest Labs Flux tools. I'll have links and everything in the description for all these locations. On Hugging Face here, this is the one directly from Black Forest Labs, and you could download the Flux One Fill Dev Safe Tensors file. That's 24 gigs, but if you don't have enough VRAM, I'm using, and there's other ones out there. These are just the two I'm just going to cover because this one is the default one from them, and this is the one that I've been using. I used this early on, and that's just the one I've been using, and it works fine. Either one doesn't matter. If you have enough VRAM, you could run the full one. I have 12 gigs of VRAM, so I do definitely prefer using the FP8 one because it's half the size. But either way, you just want to go ahead, depending on which one you grab, just click on the download, and then you want to save it in the models folder, and then in your diffusion models folder. And then we're just going to go ahead and save it in there. You can put it in a subfolder if you want. That's up to you. Okay, and for obviously Civet AI one, we can just go ahead. We'll click download, and we'll go in, same place, models, diffusion models, and I can save that in there. Okay, so once you've downloaded your Flux Fill model and you have it in the folder that you want it in, you want to go to your models folder and you want to hit this refresh button, and then you should see your Flux Fill models listed here. You don't need both. I have both of them in here. I use them for testing, but honestly, I haven't found any difference between the FP8 and the standard one in my own usage, except for the fact that since I don't have a ton of VRAM, this works much faster than for me to use the FP8. Now, as far as inpainting goes, there's multiple ways of doing this. You can just drag and drop an image in there. Most people will be editing the own images they have. They don't like the results or something like that. You can also do real pictures. If you have your old photos or something like that, you want to remove something from an image, you can bring it in here, drop it in here, and do it. I would recommend adjusting the resolution, though. Otherwise, if you're working with a very large image, it's going to take a lot of work, and you may have some difficulty there, and it might not always match things properly. Now, the other thing to keep in mind with Flux Fill is it does take in the rest of the image's context. So it's not always easy to change something when you think it might be, because it just doesn't think it should be changed, and it has a hard time. So in here I have this image. We can go to our image history in Swarm and select an image. I've gone ahead and select this one because I'm going to first fix those pants. So let's say the image is exactly how I wanted it, but I didn't want the hole in the jeans, but otherwise everything else is perfect. Now, the first couple things you need to do is the other settings. You don't need to really change anything else in the steps or anything like that. You can leave those all as they are. Now, one thing you will want to do is go into your sampling section, and this flux guidance scale, you're going to want to go in here and set that to 30. You can't, by default, you can only slide it up to 10, so you need to go in here, click on it, and just type 30. Or you can go into your settings in Swarm, and there is a setting in there to change that. Okay, flux guidance scale right here. We can go into there, under the user parameter configuration, scroll down to the group sampling, and under the flux guidance scale right here, we will go over here and the view max, I think, so we can change that. I'll change that to 30, and then I'll hit save. Now, when we go back in here, we're going to refresh the whole page. There we go. Now, we can slide that all the way up. So now we can just slide it up and have it set to the max of 30 if we want. Or you can just type it in as I showed you. So that's the most important thing you want to change, is set that to 30. It will still work, but I found not as well if you don't have that. And that's what they recommend. So let's go back. Let's get our image. Okay, so we have our image here. Now we've set the flux guidance scale to 30, and we've got the Flux Fill selected as our model, so we're all set there. First thing we want to do is I'm going to click up here on the Edit Image option, and that'll open our image editor. And you'll also notice now over here on the left, the init image is now enabled. So let's open that up, because you do want to go in here and increase the creativity. This is the denoising basically. So if you start off with a lower amount, it's not going to completely change everything. And you can use it, I think, on lower amounts. I don't tend to do that, but just remember, if you have that set down, you're going to try to replace that. It's not going to fix this, because it's going to have too much of that original image to work with. So we want to set this normally all the way up to 1. I'll cover some of these other ones after on what options, what they do, and what you might want to leave enabled. But most of the time I find you want to leave those as the default. In most cases, they work pretty well. There is one thing that I am going to show you, though, once I get it to happen, and that is sometimes when you mask an area, which means basically mark the area you want to change, it will leave a slight edge to it when you're done. And I'm going to show you how to potentially get rid of that. There's a couple different ways to deal with that, and I now understand why that happens. So let me get that to happen, and when it does happen, then I'll show you how to fix it. But until then, let's just stick with the basics here. So on the left here, this panel, we have different options. I'm not going to dive into most of these because they're not 100% needed, but you have your general tool. This allows you to click and move around. Then you have the move, which moves the layer. We're not dealing with that. Select, that we're not using for inpainting. Then we have the paintbrush, which is for painting the mask. And down here you have the color. I just leave it as the white. And then the radius of the tool, that determines how big that is. And then the other thing to keep in mind is over here on the right, if you hit X, it'll close you out of this here. And we're now out of there. That we still have the init image. We'd want to turn that off if we were done, but we're not done. So I'm going to go back to edit image. And in here you have plus image and plus mask. That's to add a new layer in here. So if we click on mask, we now have 2 mask layers. We only need 1, but if for some reason, if we delete that, we can add a new mask layer. You do, when you're inpainting, you want to make sure you're always on the mask layer normally, unless you're purposely painting on the image, which I'm not going to cover here really, but that is a trick sometimes to do certain things. You can paint on the image with certain colors to influence things, but we're going to be sticking with the mask layer. So do make sure, if you get weird results, always double check and make sure you actually painted on the mask layer, because sometimes I'll find I somehow paint on the image layer, I go to generate, and then I realize I screwed up. Double check to make sure you're on the mask layer. So what we would do here is we have the mask layer highlighted. I can zoom in with the scroll wheel on my mouse, which is broken, so keep that in mind. Now we can just highlight an area. I always highlight a little bit bigger. You want to highlight bigger than the area, preferably. There is a slight, it doesn't go right to the edge. There's actually this option, the mask blur. You can set how much of that it kind of blurs it in to blend things together. I usually, as I said, most of this stuff I leave as the default, but I will explain what some of them do just so you have an idea of what you can do once we... Now, over here you have the eraser, so if I wanted to erase part of that, I could erase it. And then you have the paint bucket, which you could, I guess, the threshold. Yeah, I don't really use that, but you could use that. Let's go back to the paintbrush. So I have that selected. As you can see, it's on the mask layer here. Now, the key when you're prompting, it can be a little difficult for certain things because you might not know exactly what you want to prompt for, and a lot of times you may not even have to prompt. Let me put on, okay, I got it for one image here. So I'm just going to go ahead without a prompt in there. I'm going to hit generate just to show you what it will do. It will try to just fill it in with what it thinks should be there. So if you're just looking for a slight variation of something, of that part of the image, then you might not even need to put a prompt or anything in there. But you can use LoRa's with the inpainting, but I find it's really hit or miss, and you may have to increase their weight. I don't find, like if I use a character LoRa, I don't find usually it's going to fix the face or anything like that in my experience. Now, the first time you go to use things, do keep in mind, if it doesn't seem to be happening fast, is it does download what is necessary in the background, so you can bring up your command window and see what's happening. So for us right now, it's actually not waiting for the model load. Well, I guess it is, but it has to download things first. So when you go to install, all you need to do is download the Flux Fill tool. It'll take care of downloading the rest of the stuff that you're going to need in the background. And you'll see that downloading in the window here if you're not sure. Okay, let's see what happened here. Changed it, but it left the hole in the jeans. That's sort of thing that's going to happen. So let's try just putting jeans in here. Now, one other thing I did want to show you, and luckily it's noticeable in this image. If we go into here and we zoom in, you're going to notice right along here, you're going to see that's where that mask was in the line. So I'm going to show you two ways to, and some things aren't as noticeable. You won't see it as much. But as you start doing more and more edits, it'll start to become more obvious. Let's go over to this option here that we were talking about, the init image recomposite mask. So what happens is this, after it generates the masked area, it recomposites the new part that it created back into the original image. That's the recommended way to do it. The reason for that is because, like, if we click on here, as it says, if disabled, VAE artifacts may build up across Inpaint operations. And that will happen if you keep generating, and if you have this turned off and you do multiples of these, it will eliminate that line. But as you keep inpainting the same image multiple times, you're going to start noticing a degradation. It's going to start getting worse. Now, you can probably get away with it if you're just doing one edit and that's it. Let's say we're just going to fix this and we want to do it. You can probably just go ahead, uncheck that, and generate. That should... Well, we'll see what happens with this unchecked. As I said, it shouldn't be noticeably different as far as the image goes. So now, this time we actually got our jeans fixed. And you'll notice if we zoom in, there's no difference in the image. But what'll happen is, let's say we now take this image, let's highlight it, and let's edit that image. So we create now a new one. Now this is the one we just fixed. And I'm going to go ahead and let's say paint yellow sneakers. And I'm going to leave this unchecked because I want to show what this will do over time. Hopefully it'll show within a few images, but it'll give you an idea of how this works. Let's see if we can see that now. It may be hard to notice, but if we go between the three of these, you'll notice the rest of the image changes slightly. It starts losing colors, it starts changing. So as we can see, that is slowly degrading the image as it goes. So as I said, you can probably get away with it with one before you start noticing the degradation and it starts to become an issue. But I'm going to show you another possible way around that. So instead of this, so let's get out of there. We're going to get rid of that picture. So we'll go back to the original one, the first one here, and I'm going to check this. So we now have that back because that's really the way we should be doing it. It edits it, then it brings it back into the original image. But as I showed you, it leaves a line. Well, it turns out there's another possible solution to this. Although in my experience so far, it seems to be working fine, but I just discovered this the other day. So we're going to scroll way down to the bottom here. And if you don't have certain options in here, you want to check this display advanced options. So we're going to check that. And then down here, you're going to find advanced sampling. If we expand that, well, go in here and we're going to scroll down a little bit and you're going to find a thing that says color correction behavior. And we have two options, and this is considered experimental, but so far in my testing, it seems to work pretty well. Autocorrect color when compositing a masked image. So this handles when it brings that back in, that's how this is going to be handled. So by none, it doesn't attempt to do any color correction. I set it to linear. So right here, it's example in doing inpainting with Flux models is a Flux VAE does not retain consistent colors. Linear may help correct this misbehavior. So when you're doing this with Flux, give it a shot for linear. So far in my experimentations, it seems to work very well. So now we can leave that checked. I'm going to go in here. Let's just change that again to jeans. So let's edit that image. There we go. So let's get back started on the original one. We are going to fix the jeans. So we'll go ahead, we'll hit generate. Now we have our jeans fixed. And now you want to make sure once we're done with this, so we fixed that. So we'll exit out of that. We have our new image. Click on the new image and hit edit image again. And now let's say we want to change the sneaker color. We can go ahead in here and highlight that. You can try to be more precise if you want to keep certain things the same. But a lot of this will take in the rest of the image as context, even shadows. So if you have shadows and you're trying to replace something with it, then that's going to be an issue because those shadows tell it that there should be something there. And if you try to regenerate something, you're going to have issues because those shadows are affecting things. Okay, and we now have our yellow sneakers, as we can see here. Now, if we look at the last couple images, so let's exit out of that, and we compare those. Let's zoom in on the colors, and you'll notice as I move between these last two, so it maintains the colors. There's not that shift you get from when you uncheck that box. So that's the option you want to remember. Get rid of that line, advanced sampling, and then that color correction behavior linear. Now for the next part, I'm going to show you a couple more features. Some of these settings in here, the mask shrink grow, the mask grow feature. We'll actually cover that first with one other feature, and that is, well, let's go into the edit image here. You can manually mask things, and I still tend to do that with almost everything myself by painting on, as I showed you. Well, let me change that back to white. But there is another option in here. If we go up to the three dots up top here, click on that and go to auto segment image. Now, if you haven't used this yet, the first time it goes, when you click on it, you're going to get a prompt that'll ask you to install it and set it up. That's fine. Just click on that. Takes a few seconds usually, downloads the model and installs it, and then it restarts the back end, and then you're good to go. Then you just click it again. Now, once you click on that, it takes a few seconds, depending on your computer, on your video card. And then what it does is it breaks everything apart into pieces. Some images it works better than others. I don't use it a lot because it doesn't work the greatest. But sometimes for certain things, if you're really trying for an intricate mask, because let's say you really don't want to change anything outside of the edges of these pants. Let's say we want to change the pant color and we want to make them red. Well, this is how we can do that. We could probably just have masked it as well. But like I said, let's say you want to really keep it specific to that area. Now, one thing you'll notice when it does this, it creates a new image layer. Before you generate, you're going to want to hide that. And I'll show you how to do it. So we click on the paint bucket tool. Then we want to make sure we're on the mask layer. That's important here. Make sure you select the mask layer. Then click on the pants. So it uses that as a reference to know where to click, where to select. So we've now selected the pants. Out of my prompt, I'm going to put in red pants. The other thing I have to do, as I mentioned, we need to hide this before we generate, because otherwise that's the image on top. So we can right click on that and bring that opacity down. And now that layer is still there, but it's hidden. It's not going to affect anything. And as you can see, this is still masked. Now we'll go ahead, we'll hit generate, and we should get our red pants. There's a reason why we might not on this. I'm hoping in a sense that it doesn't give us the red pants, but yeah, it's not going to give us the red pants. Now, this comes down to what I mentioned before when it comes to the context of the image. For example, if you try to replace something in an image that's one color and you just mask that item and then want to replace it, it's going to have a hard time because reflections and everything else and shadows, all that stuff brings color from the original object. So you can have a hard time trying to replace something yellow with something red if the reflections in the image are yellow. So for this one, a perfect example here is you'll see it didn't change the color to red pants. You say, well, why? Well, if we look in here, we zoom in, you'll notice that there's a lot of blue around the edges. So our mask left a lot of that blue, and that was influencing our generated image. Now, how do we get around that? Well, that is what this mask row feature can do. It doesn't have to be used with the auto segment everything, but this is one of those things that it is really useful for. So when we change this, that's how many pixels we want this mask to grow by. So it's going to go and then go outside of these edges. Now, these are probably only 1 or 2 pixels, so we could probably go by that. And now the problem is up here, those are going to go more than 1 or 2 pixels. So by stretching that out, it is going to grow it substantially, but that should hopefully allow us to get these pants red without stretching the mask too much over other things we might not want to change. So now that I have that set, let's try it on 10. We're going to try generating that again. Okay, so now we have red pants. So now if we look in here, it still didn't reach up in there and change that. So that's something you might have to go in and fix after. But it at least allowed us to, but it also stretched this down there. So you really have to play with those settings a little bit to get what you want. We could have just gone with maybe 5 or 6, and that would probably work just as well. So it wouldn't stretch quite as far. That's something that you really got to experiment with. It's going to depend upon the mask and everything else, but that's what the mask row function does. I find I don't usually use it because I don't use the auto segment, and that's really one of the few places that I find it's useful. So that's how that one works. Let's go on to the mask shrink row one. I'm going to try it on this image here. But if we zoom in, there's not a lot of detail in here. But let's say we want to regenerate a different face, but hopefully we can get a little bit more detail on that, even though it's still going to pixelate it because it's not high resolution. So what we can do is click mask shrink row. And we're going to go ahead and let me edit the image. Yeah, there we go. Paintbrush. Now we can do that. There we go. It's a woman's face. The mask shrink row, what that tells it to do is to zoom in directly on this, the masked area. So it'll basically put a square around this and it will generate that area only. Now, with the number next to it, that's how many pixels outside of that area to stretch that box. So with 100 in here, it would go 100 pixels in each direction. But we're going to just right now do 10 just for an example. Whoops, I don't want that. And this has some advantages, but you have to always consider the disadvantages to using this. because it's only good for certain things. Now, when we go ahead and do that, remember one thing I did tell you is that when you're inpainting like this, and this is not just for Flux Fill per se, but it takes in the rest of the image as context. So when it's only generating this section over here, it is only taking that area into consideration, not the rest of the image. So you can end up with some weird results. Yes, it'll be much more detailed. As we can see here, it's really detailed because it's a much higher resolution that it's working on. Now it is going to lower that resolution and recomposite it back into the image when it's done, but it should theoretically look better. And we have more detail to it. But it doesn't take the rest of the image into context, which isn't quite as noticeable here. Now, it wasn't smiling because I didn't ask for the smiling face, but that's one way that that works. Now, I'm going to show you why it sometimes won't work well. And even in cases like this, it may not work well because it just isn't going to match certain things. So let's take a different image here. Same thing, I'm going to leave the mask shrink grow on, and let's go ahead and edit this image, and we're going to mask the eye, just one eye for the moment. Let's say I wanted two different color eyes. This isn't going to be easy, and it shouldn't do this. You're most likely going to have to trick it or take and edit this afterwards, and I'm going to show you why this can be a little bit of a challenge. But let's go ahead first so we understand how this works. And let's say I want to create a brown eye. Now I'll put this on just 10 for now, and we'll hit generate. Now the nice thing about this, when it does this, it's going to zoom in and it's going to make it nice and really detailed so it can really work with the intricate details. Now obviously it gets downscaled when it's done, but still you're starting off with much more detail. You could even put like a reflection of things in the eyeball, things like that. Because as you can see, it's just working on that little area there. But it's also only taking that area into account for what it's generating. It doesn't understand the rest of the image. One of the issues with that you're going to find is the eyes, the direction they're looking, are not going to match up. Because it doesn't know which direction this eye's looking to know which direction this eye should be looking. And if we look at the original, we'll notice she's looking more, the eye is more over to this side than this one is. And that's the reason for that. It doesn't know what that eye is supposed to look like because it doesn't have that in the image. But if we go ahead and do the same thing, we turn off the mask shrink grow and we do the brown eye. Now, when it generates, it's going to have the full context of the face. So it will get the eye the direction it should be looking. It's also going to present another problem, and this is something that's going to be hard to overcome. You might get lucky. You can try to say different colored eyes, things like that. Okay, so now it's done. We told it brown eye, and it did that before, no problem. This was before it created brown eye. It worked. But now you're going to notice here, we didn't get a brown eye. Well, and it does match up because it now has the whole context. But also because of that whole context, it got the same color eye because that's what it associates is it should be the same color. Even though down here you told it a brown eye, that doesn't match up with the context of the full image. So that can be difficult. So that gives you a basic idea of what that does. The mask shrink grow. So you can use it to zoom in and it will really detail certain areas, but it doesn't understand the context of the rest of the image when you do it. Now we could do and increase this up to like, let's say, I don't know, 200. And we can go to generate. Now what'll happen here is it's going to zoom in. It just won't zoom in as much as it did before. So as you can see here, it still now takes into account the other eye. It's got just the edge of it, but it still probably won't get the brown because if it can see enough of that, it's probably going to have a little bit of difficulty getting a brown eye. But if you can somehow get it where it only sees the tiny edge of that eye, so it doesn't know that it's, not brown, but it knows roughly where, the iris and pupil are, then you can probably get this one potentially to match up and get it to be more brown. So let's see if we can do that. That was pretty close. So here we got it to give us a different colored eye. Not exactly, I wanted a little more brown, but this gives you a basic idea. It was able to use roughly the area, the edge. So if you could get just the edge of this eye, you might be able to trick it. So that's the sort of thing you might have to do with Flux. The example I'm using because it is pretty difficult to pull something like that off just by using inpainting because of how it's context aware of everything else in the image. Well, that pretty much covers the basics of inpainting with Flux and SwarmUI. If there is enough interest, I may do more videos on using Swarm. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like button. And if you want to help out with the cost of electricity, I do have a link in the description for donating a cup of electricity, which is very, very much appreciated. These videos do take a decent amount of time to put together, and YouTube sadly does not pay very much unless videos go viral, which these do not. Thanks for watching and have a great day.